Hello everybody, Realm Builder Guy here, and welcome back to a new Crusader Kings 3 guide. Before I get into it, I want to thank everybody that's been liking, commenting, subscribing, and of course watching all the content here on the channel. Thank you so much. So on the heels of the 1.1 patch, I have decided to put out a guide on a specific region, and this is something I'm planning on doing in future. So my interest is obviously stories and stuff like that, but I may occasionally go into some guides that go into game mechanics and gameplay mechanics, but I always feel like the thing that gets me interested is who are the interesting people in a certain region, what are some interesting stories, and what can I develop from there. And as I have an academic background in history, this is just something that really interests me, so hopefully you'll find it interesting as well. The reason why a 1.1 patch is important is because of the following notes on the patch itself. They vastly empowered the Mongol Empire's armies. Now you will truly learn to fear the horsemen of the steppe. Temujin, also known as Genghis Khan, and co. now starts off with substantial prowess scores. Temujin now starts with a full roster of knights as well as a few Han siege engineers. The Mongol Empire is now much more aggressive and will attack several times per year if opportunity arises. Weak realms are now much more likely to agree to subjugation by the Mongol Empire, and the Borjigin Dynasty is no longer obscure and starts with a few warfare legacies unlocked. Just so you know, they are still technically obscure, but just barely, so they will bump up to the next level pretty quickly after you start the save or your campaign with them. Before I get into it as well, I want to make a recommendation of a book. It is Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World by Jack Weatherford. It's a New York Times bestseller. It's a good book. It's not too terribly long, so you can get through it at a pretty good pace and speed. It's well written, in an entertaining way. It's not overly boring, droning on academically, so I highly recommend that one. So I'm starting in the 1066 date. Now, I have observer mode right now, just because I want to get rid of all the stuff here on the side. So in this 1066 date, the reason why I'm picking 1066 over 867, well, one is obviously border gore is a little crazy in 867, but 1066 I feel like gives so much more flavor to the region. Also because certain tribes and certain peoples have converted to Christianity or Buddhism or Islam, and it just adds a little bit more spice to it all. But I will go over 867 later here in the video, and fair warning, this is probably going to be one of the longer guides. So now let's get straight into it. Now the region that we're going to focus a lot on is right up here. Greater Liao is an area that holds the most of the Mongol or direct Mongol culture groups, even though some are Mongol adjacent culture groups. And we're going to go through that. I'm going to give you some historical background on each of them. I do want to talk about some of the ones that are kind of on the outside here. Right now, you've got the Chugochak as well as Emil. Now you have Kun House here, which I could not find any historical reference to. And then Buryat. Now, as a house, I couldn't find any historical reference to them, but there are Buryat tribes, but that's a different area up here that I'll go into. This is a house Buryat, but they are Mongol culture, part of the Mongolic group. So keep those in mind. They look like they're fictional. There are a few other ones that are fictional that it seems like, but that's not untypical for Crusader Kings 3. There are quite a few fictional characters or houses in here because Paradox had to somehow fill the map and kind of fit where some culture groups were, where some tribes may have been, and this is just, I assume, kind of an amalgamation of multiple tribes. Now, the next one that's Mongol that's outside is in the Uda Valley, and that's the House of Mergid. Now, the Mergid house actually did exist. They were one of the biggest opposition to Temujin, or Genghis Khan, at his time. But, of course, 1066, there is no Temujin yet. So not only are they in the Uda Valley, they are also in Great Liao. If we get into Great Liao, just overall as an entity, going through 3 pages of notes here. So, Great Liao was founded after the collapse of the Tang Dynasty. As you can see, the ruler here is a Buddhist faith, and they are also part of the Mongolic group, so the House of Liao. But they were always a little bit more, let's say, China-leaning. They were the first, actually, dynasty to, entity to control all of Manchuria. The current leader, actually, his name changes historically later to Emperor Daozong, and eventually they are overthrown by the Jurchens, or the Jin dynasty. Now, within Great Liao, if we zoom in here, there are quite a few entities. There we go. So, the first one I want to kind of talk about is right here in Karabalgasun. And we have Tubenai Setsen of Karabalgasun and the Borjigin. Now, Borjigin is very, very interesting and very, very important because this is the dynastic house of Genghis Khan. So this is the dynasty that would come to rule the Mongol Empire, the Golden Horde, the Great Horde, the Chagatai, the Yuan dynasty, the Ilkhanate, the Timurids, and the Mughal dynasties. So everything springing from here. But you can start off, here is county tier realm. So you're a count, and you've got quite a few titles to start off with, and a claim on a duchy as well. He's over domain limit, but you can kind of deal with that. But the Borjigin, this is probably the most interesting and intriguing overall, just because you can start relatively in the beginning. Now, they are there in 867 as the house from whence Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, etc., does come to develop. So very, very interesting one here. Now, I mentioned the Mergids. They start off also not just outside independently of Great Liao, but also within in the Selenga Valley. And here you have Dagun of Selenga Valley, also of the Mergid house. And a dynasty, you can see they are considered insignificant, so that's a little bit above obscure. But, the other thing about Great Liao directly controls just right here. So they are kind of in a precarious position. We will get into that in a minute. Now, I did mention there are a few other direct Mongol holdings in Great Liao that it looks like are probably just made up. So you have Tanuola here. Ufs Nur. You can see Mongol, direct Mongol, but that they don't really exist. A lot of these are just names of tribes or ethnic Mongolian, regionalities and tribal amalgamations over the course of time. The other one, let's see if I can find them here right next to them, and Tarvagatai is Ganbolds. They also, as far as I could find in research, didn't really exist. So those are the ones with the name, obviously, Mongol attached to them. Now, we're going to kind of move a little bit outside of that to some other ones that are of interest. Now, we're going to talk about one here, and that is the Kori Tumid. Now, the Kori Tumid, you can find them here in Great Liao. As you can see, Kori Tumid, insignificant. So, again, a step above obscure. They are also in Shiti. I don't know how else to say that, as well as Kitoi. Now, this is another Mongol tribe. Now, you can see here they are Buryat. They're part of the Mongolic group. But the Kori Tumid wasn't a dynasty. It was actually a tribe that also fought very strongly against subjugation by Genghis Khan. But eventually, of course, they were subjugated. Then if you go to Buryat, now I mentioned before you had the House Buryat. Well, you actually have a Buryat tribe. We're talking about here is a Buryat culture, part of the Mongolic group. You have quite a few all the way up here in this kind of tucked in northeast corner of the map. All of these are Buryat. Now they are Mongolic, not Turkic. So the story here, you can of course look at this and say, hey, maybe start as a Buryat tribe and bring this whole region together before taking on Great Liao. You can even do that as a Kori Tumed and then kind of move into Great Liao as well. So that's one strategy for these guys, is to kind of build their dynasty in their realm, bringing together all the different Buryat tribes to challenge Great Liao and eventually, possibly, Temujin, depending on if they, come to power. Now, if we move over here to Kargassia and Shoria, you see you have the Uryankai, or as I like to call them, the Urukai. The Uryankai, they are a part of a Turkic group, but if you go through some of the historical records, you can make the argument maybe part of the Mongol group, culture group, but they are there. They are another tribe. They are considered the forest tribe of Siberia. They also were eventually subjugated, like pretty much everybody, by Genghis Khan. And the Mongol Empire, but they held out relatively long. They are also found within Great Liao, right here in Tanu Ola. So here, another opportunity to maybe start independently of Great Liao and build up your power base here as one of the Uryankai tribes to try to take them on, but they are in a significantly weaker position. Now, another one you can look at is here in Kochko, and that is the Orions. Now, they are part of the Mongolic group, and again, historically speaking, this is not really a house, but rather an ethnic group and a tribe. They are definitely in the weakest position of all the different Mongolic tribes here. In my opinion, if you're looking to destabilize and build a true Mongol empire, I would still recommend either going with Mergid or with, of course, the most interesting one, which is House Borjigin, and eating up Great Liao from the inside. So, conquering some of your fellow vassals and then attacking Great Liao, which is really just based right here. So building up a kind of inner Great Liao, what do I want to say here? Alliance, marrying off kids and so on, and then eating up Great Liao kind of from the inside and maybe bringing in some of the exterior tribes as well. If we look further in Great Liao, we have a few other ones of interest. Now here in Kangai, we have Kairat, the Kairat culture of Mongolic group. Now the Kairat was actually they had their own Khaganate, so to speak, but as you can notice right here, they are Christian. They are Nestorian, so that Eastern Christian church. They're rumored to be kind of the Kairats as the source of the Prester John legend. And they did build their own Khanate after a while. Now, the other one to look in here that I personally find really interesting are right over here. Now, you have the Neyman. They are also, or Neyman, part of the Mongolic group. They are also Nestorian Christians. Now, you have a few of them. They are also in Ulaangom and right out here in Buku. But in Gobi Altai, so this desert mountain area, you have the Guchugut. Now, the Guchugut, they are referenced historically. Now, these are all obscure houses, but they are the Nymans. Now, the Nymans, they also fought very strongly against the, Genghis Khan and his expansion of the Mongol Empire, eventually being subjugated, as everybody is. What's interesting also about the Neyman, they consider themselves descendants from the biblical Magi now, of course, or Magi. But the Magi, those are the three kings. So the Neymans say the three kings came from us, or we came from them. Now the Kairat said kind of the same thing, but so this is kind of your Christian core here within Great Liao and in the surrounding areas. So they're all within Great Liao. What's interesting here, you could possibly build a Christian Mongolic dynasty by, gobbling up all the Nymans or Kairats in here. I like the Gobi Altai start because you've got some defensible borders here. with those mountains. You can't get through, so it's very, very tight. Now your area is a little bit split, but if you can take on Ulaangom, another Neyman, that gives you a good power base and strength here on the southern side to maybe then also either gobble up Buku or ally, marry into them, something along that lines, and kind of build an Nestorian Mongolic Khaganate or power base down here on the south side of Great Liao. So very, very interesting there. Now, if we move outside, we come up here to Kakas Hollow. And part of the Turkic group, they are Kyrgyz, are the NSA Kyrgyz. Now, you can see noteworthy. So this is another step above in their level of splendor. You'll see them again in 867, significantly bigger, but the NSA Kyrgyz were actually, they unified the Kyrgyz tribes into Kyrgyzstan. Now, they rebelled against the Uyghur Khaganate and drove them completely out of Mongolia and eventually submitted peacefully to Genghis Khan. Now, there are a lot of these areas around here are also Kyrgyz tribes. Now, what you could do is rebuild the splendor of Kyrgyzstan, basing here, and just let Great Liao be Great Liao, kind of conquer and gobble up all of your Kyrgyz neighbors in one shape or another. As you can see, he's already over domain limit, but again, you can figure that one out pretty quickly. But most of these are Kyrgyz tribes, so maybe build a new Kyrgyzstan, just like you could build a Buryat dynasty up here. But Kyrgyzstan, one that, for me personally, given the historical significance, would be also really, really interesting. Now let's move south. And south, we've got 3 realms really to cover here. And one, we're going to start off with Kochko, or Kocho. Kocho was a historical kingdom or Khaganate founded by the Uyghurs. So if you click on here, you have the House Bilge, and Idikut Kül of Kocho, a true historical figure. And you can see they are Buddhists and part of the Turkic group, the Uyghurs. Now, the Uyghurs, of course, are in the headlines right now just because of what they're going through in China. But they are, if you talk to a lot of historians, they consider them more part of the Mongol group, culture group than Turkic, but here in the game, they are Turkic. Now, the Uyghurs were the former rulers of all of Mongolia until the Kyrgyz pushed them out and south, and they founded the kingdom or Khaganate of Kocho. Now, what's interesting about them, it is historically a multi-ethnic and religious realm, but it's very Chinese in its elements. So it took in a lot of elements and influence from China, including, of course, the religion to a degree, but also, they wrote in Chinese and Chinese tradition also in their teachings and so on. Now, their Buddhism comes from the Tang Dynasty, again from China. They are very disliked by the Turkic Muslims to the west, who I will get into next, and they had a lot of battles and wars with them. They were eventually conquered by Genghis Khan. I mean, they submitted when they realized there's nothing we can do here, and then eventually they were conquered, converted to Islam, and dissolved by the Chagatai. And the Chagatai, of course, were another part of the former Mongol Empire. So Kocho, very, very interesting here. Again, you have all of these Uyghur tribes. Most of them are in the, if we look here, you've got Mahayana is a Buddhist faith, and then Kocho itself is Vajrayana Buddhist faith, but this is a Buddhist Khaganate, and Idikut is kind of the name for their leader. So Kocho, very interesting. The interesting thing here is I believe this is Uyghur realm here of Bugün. Of course, I wouldn't really start as these guys. I wouldn't recommend it. That's a very, very difficult start because you are an insignificant house. You're obscure. You're wedged between Great Liao and all of the Mongol hordes up here, and then Kocho to the south as Kocho. That's the first one I would kind of try to take over. So this is an interesting one. Now, their big adversaries is not Great Liao, but over here in Jetisu. Now, Jetisu is actually just a region. historically, you had the Karakanid Dynasty. Now, the Karakanid Khaganate, or Khanate, is here called Jetsu, or Jetisu, sorry. And you had, at this time, in 1066, they already had a split between East and West. And West, anybody who plays EU4 has seen this one before. It's Transoxiana. Now, this is also Karakanid. But to kind of distinguish the two, I guess Paradox decided to go with Jetisu and Transoxiana here. Now, these are Turkic rulers. As you can see, they are Karluk. They are part of the Turkic group. And they shifted, actually, historically speaking, Central Asian culture away from Persian and to Turkic. Because also to the south, you have the Seljuks. Now, for roughly 200 years, they ruled. They were split between East and West. And eventually, in the late 11th century, so in this century, the Seljuks moved north and kind of just took over the Karakanid Khanate. So it's another interesting one. They are, of course, a Muslim faith. And a goal here could possibly be, if you are Jetisu, is to take over Transoxiana and try to fight against the Seljuks. Or move here against Uyghurs, which happened quite a lot. The advantage you have here in Kochko, if you decide to take over these guys, is if the Seljuks start moving into the Karakanid Khanate territory, it's a good time to kind of attack them and weaken them. Now, there is one other 500-pound gorilla in the room, and that, of course, is Kumania. The Khanate of Kumania, it is a Kuman culture. They are Turkic. They are Tengri as well, so unreformed steppe faith, as many of you are over here. I'm not going to go into them too much just because they're so big, and they go all the way over here into basically the European side of what eventually becomes Russia. But this gives you a pretty good overview of the different cultures in 1066 that are part of the Mongol Empire, Mongolia. I mean, this all becomes the Mongol Empire. Now, what I would find personally is the most interesting here is to start in Great Liao and, of course, start here as the Borjigin dynasty and see if you can emulate everything that Temujin or Genghis Khan eventually achieved with breaking up Great Liao, gobbling up all of this territory, defeating the Kyrgyz, defeating the Kochko, and then eventually defeating the Kumania as well as the Karakanid Dynasty and the Seljuks. So this is where you can start a Mongol empire, the best in my opinion, but there's so many choices here. Another one that I personally think would be really interesting are these Nestorian Christian tribes here and building a base from there. But now let's head on over to 867. So welcome to 867, and the first thing you'll notice, no Great Liao, and the Kyrgyz Khanate, or Kyrgyzstan, is gigantic and basically encompasses pretty much everything that Great Liao did. Now, if you go in here, you'll find the Borjigin are there as well, and you've got actually a bastard as the head of it. So this could be an interesting place to start overall if you want to start all the way in 867. So a few of the notes. So the Kyrgyz Khanate is obviously the big deal here. But to the south, you can see you have Kochko already. The key thing here, though, is they are not Buddhist yet at this point. However, those that do influence them to Buddhism are already here. If I can find them real quick. In Agni, you have Sogdian. So the Agni, House Agni, it's just that region. The Sogdians were a ethnic group. You can see here they're part of the Iranian group that brought Buddhism to the Uyghurs. So this is your chance to play as Kochko before they become Buddhist. Maybe you go a different direction. Also, just so you know, there are no Nestorian Christian groups here really to speak of either in what is Great Liao. No Kumania, of course. There are no Seljuks, but you can actually start some of those empires. So you go over here to Sariarka, and you can see this is the one Kuman culture. So Kumania, I'm guessing, kind of started right in here, and you can create Kumania. And Seljuks, they were of the Oghuz tribe. So, of course, you have the Oghuz Il right here, and there is your Oghuz culture. So, hey, maybe start as the Seljuks. But the one that I find personally really interesting is if you go over here, you notice, hey, these guys, Guiyi and the dynasty of Zhang, but here's the big one, Han culture. So they are part of the Chinese culture group, and they are a Taoist faith. Now, the name Guiyi is actually, it's not a kingdom. Historically, it was considered the Guiyi circuit or Guiyi army. They were instituted there by the Han dynasty to control the Tang dynasty and later the Song dynasty, to establish control and connect the Silk Road that would go through here. Again, let's get some trade DLCs going here for CK3. So that's why they were put into power. Now, they were historically ruled by the Zhang dynasty, and King Huiyashen, and again, I'm butchering these names, but oh well, this is actually who ruled this army, or this kingdom, at that time. Now, the Zhang family eventually kind of fell apart because of family intrigue. In fact, this guy right here got murdered. Their big adversaries were Kochko, just over here. So they constantly fought for this territory. It went back and forth. Now, if you zoom in to the Guiyi, you have a ton of different regions. You've got Ganju, Guazhou, Guiyi itself is here, Sogokotso, Wuluhai, Jingqing, Liangzhu, and so on. And they were eventually, so the Zhao, or the Zhang, were eventually overthrown by the Cao family, who are right here. They are also from the Han culture group, but they are Buddhist and not Taoist. So this house overthrew the ruling house of Guiyi. So, well, a little interesting there. Now you have the Yuans here as well in different areas. So Yuan, they aren't technically a house, but of course you had the Yuan dynasty that was eventually established. Now they are also the Chinese culture group, and they are Taoist. This is the Yuan dynasty was eventually established by Genghis Khan, or was it Kublai Khan? I can't quite remember. I believe Kublai Khan in China. So maybe that's just an homage to that. Now you do have Christians here. In Wuluhai, you have the Urakai, so an insignificant but above obscure. They are Ingut, so they are a Turkic group, and they are Nestorian Christians. So that's interesting. Then you also have the Tuoluba Tribe in Sogotoko. They are Mongolic, and they are an unreformed Hesekche. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but Millie faith, and they are Mongolic, so they are in here, in the Tuoluba Tribe actually had a lot of influence historically. And you have, somewhere down in here as well, right over here, in Shamil, you do have Sogdians as well, that Iranian culture group that brought Buddhism to the Uyghurs eventually, just about a century or so after 867, I believe. It was either late 9th or early 10th century. And then on top of it, you have Aksai right here. So you've got a lot of different things mixing in here. Now you have Buddhist faith, you have Tuyuhun, which is a Mongolic group, and again, Tuyuhun is a Mongolic tribe. And then you have the Erzu, which is a dynasty here. It's a higher level of splendor, so it's insignificant. It's above obscure. And this is kind of, again, a mishmash of different periods, tribes, and houses that ruled different areas of Asia, of Mongolia and China and Tibet over the course of time. Erzu did exist, but at an earlier time, the Tuoluba tribe existed, but at a little bit later time. So this is a nice little mixture of the two. Again, an interesting one. Now, as far as strategies go, now you could take the Uyghurs and see if you can not become Buddhist, or take them and try to conquer the Gyuyu. Now you could move over here and attack the Karakanid, who are not yet Muslim. Or you go into the Kyrgyz Khanate and you go into the Wayback Machine and start the Borjigin Dynasty all the way here and try to gobble up this area before Great Liao even gets established and build a true Mongol empire and honestly kick out the Kyrgyz from the region. So there you have it. That is a little bit longer guide on a lot of the different historical characters in Mongolia and a lot of the different ways you could play it, people you could take over. There are so many interesting stories here. My personal recommendation would be go with 1066, but if you're going to go 867, I'll be honest, down here, Guyi is really the one that I personally think is the most interesting here in 867. If you want to establish a Mongol empire, probably 1066 will give you the better start and easier transition. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and let me know in the comments if there are any other regions you would like me to do guides on. I do have a bunch of them planned, but these do take a lot of time. May only take 30-40 minutes to record and 20-30 minutes to then edit, but it takes a few hours to do all the research that goes into it. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit that like button. It definitely helps the channel and the videos. Until next time, I am Realm Builder Guy, and I will talk to you soon.